Imagine being in a relationship for years, pouring your heart into every fight, every apology, and every sacrifice, all in the name of love. You think you're doing everything right, holding on, believing that if you just try a little harder, things will get better. But then, one day, you wake up and realize something crucial. Love, when it's not reciprocated, doesn't lift you up. It drains you. It strips you of your joy, your self-worth, and your peace of mind. That was Emily's reality for over a decade. She fought for love, she begged for apologies, and yet, despite all of her efforts, nothing ever changed. What she didn't know was that in the process, she had lost herself. But through the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the unspoken pain, Emily found something much more valuable: herself. This is the story of Emily's journey from heartache to self-love, a journey that not only taught her the importance of self-respect, but also how to reclaim her own happiness. This is a story about finding the strength to walk away and embrace the freedom that comes with breaking free from the chains of an unbalanced relationship. From betrayal to self-discovery, Emily's path to empowerment wasn't easy. It was filled with moments of doubt, painful decisions, and tough realizations. But through it all, she learned one powerful lesson: you cannot pour from an empty cup. The story of Emily's transformation is a powerful reminder that sometimes, in order to heal, you must first let go of what's draining you, whether it's a toxic relationship, unreciprocated love, or the expectations of others. Emily, the heart of this story, strong, resilient, but broken from years of emotional turmoil. She was always the one to fight for the relationship, but she learned the hard way that she couldn't fight alone. Mike, Emily's on and off boyfriend, a man who never truly gave her the love she deserved, leaving her in a constant state of emotional uncertainty. His pride, emotional unavailability, and selfishness kept their relationship stuck in a cycle of heartbreak. Olivia, Emily's new friend and colleague who becomes her unexpected support system. Olivia's guidance and honesty provide Emily with the clarity she desperately needed, pushing her to see her own worth and helping her make decisions that would change her life. Join Emily as she takes you through her emotional journey of realization, the pain of letting go, and the incredible strength she found within herself. A journey that proves you don't need anyone else's approval to live your best life, and that sometimes the greatest love story you'll ever have is the one you create with yourself. Stay tuned, because Emily's story is one of heartbreak, resilience, and ultimately freedom. Emily met Mike when they were both in their late teens, still figuring out who they were and what they wanted from life. Their connection was immediate. Mike was charming, confident, and everything Emily thought she wanted in a partner. He had the kind of easy smile that made her feel like she could tell him anything, and the way he listened to her made her feel seen. Their early days were filled with promises of a bright future, long phone calls, and stolen moments of joy. As the years passed, their relationship began to evolve, but not in the way Emily had hoped. It started to shift from something exciting and full of passion into something routine, something that required more from Emily than it did from Mike. The emotional connection that had been there in the beginning slowly faded. Mike became distant, withdrawn. He no longer seemed interested in the little things, the things that made their relationship special. At first, Emily chalked it up to stress from work, personal issues, or just the growing pains of being in a long-term relationship. She told herself that he would come around, that their bond was strong enough to weather these small storms. But as time wore on, the cracks in their relationship widened. Mike began spending more time with his friends, pursuing his own hobbies, and making less of an effort to connect with Emily. It was subtle at first, but over time it became impossible to ignore. Emily, however, was determined. She loved Mike, and she believed in the love they once had. So despite Mike's emotional coldness, Emily fought for the relationship. She sacrificed her own happiness, her own needs, to keep him close. She overlooked the fact that she was the only one putting in any effort. She told herself that love was about compromise, about giving more than you took, and that someday Mike would recognize all the sacrifices she was making. She began to make excuses for him, rationalizing his behavior. She told herself that he was just going through a phase, or that he was too focused on his career to notice how much she needed him. But the truth was, Emily was slowly losing herself in this relationship. She was giving up her own dreams, her own desires, just to keep Mike happy. And while she was doing everything she could to make him feel loved, he barely seemed to notice. The cyclical nature of their breakups. Their relationship soon fell into a cyclical pattern, a constant back and forth of love and distance, fights and makeups. Every time they hit a rough patch, Mike would pull away and Emily would fall into the familiar trap of begging him to stay. She would apologize even when it wasn't her fault. She would swallow her pride and do whatever it took to bring him back into her life, believing that if she just gave a little more of herself, things would finally change. The cycle repeated itself countless times. They would fight, Mike would threaten to break up, and Emily would beg for forgiveness. Mike, always emotionally distant, would act as though the breakup didn't bother him. But after a few days of cold silence, he would reach out and Emily would rush to patch things up. She would convince herself that this time it would be different, that this time Mike would truly change. And when he came back, she would welcome him with open arms, only to repeat the same pattern once again. Emily's friends and family could see the toll that this constant cycle was taking on her. They noticed how she would bend over backward to make things work with Mike, often at the expense of her own happiness. But despite their concerns, they encouraged her to reconcile. "You've been together for so long," they would say. "You've invested so much, it's worth it to fight for him." Emily wanted to believe them, but she couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling inside of her. The feeling that she was losing herself in this relationship, that the person she was becoming was no longer the person she wanted to be. Despite the advice from those around her, Emily couldn't escape the truth. Her relationship with Mike had become emotionally draining. It wasn't just the fights, it was the constant waiting, the emotional uncertainty, and the repeated betrayals of trust. She had given so much of herself to Mike, and yet each time they reconciled, it felt like she was starting over from scratch, only to face the same disappointments and unspoken frustrations. The breaking point. Emily found herself alone, both physically and emotionally drained. She had become isolated in the relationship, constantly putting Mike's needs and desires ahead of her own. She had forgotten what it felt like to put herself first. She had become so accustomed to the cycle of sacrifice and self-doubt that she no longer knew what it felt like to be truly happy. After another heated breakup, Emily found herself staring at her phone, contemplating the same old routine, begging Mike to come back, apologizing for things she hadn't done, falling into the familiar pattern of seeking his approval. But as she sat there staring at the screen, something inside her shifted. For the first time in a long while, Emily realized that she was tired. Tired of always being the one to fix things. Tired of always having to beg for forgiveness. Tired of sacrificing her happiness for someone who didn't truly value her. She looked around her apartment, the space they had shared, and felt a wave of realization wash over her. The clutter in the corners of the room, the half-empty shelves, the unused space, everything reminded her of the years she had spent trying to make this relationship work. Years of giving, of sacrificing, of hoping that love would be enough to fix everything. But it wasn't enough. It never had been. As the realization sank in, Emily felt a rush of emotions: anger, sadness, relief. But most of all, she felt clarity. She had been so wrapped up in trying to fix Mike, in trying to fix their relationship, that she had forgotten to fix herself. She had lost sight of who she was, and in the process, she had lost the love and respect she had once had for herself. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to feel the full weight of her situation. She didn't need Mike's approval to feel validated. She didn't need his love to feel whole. She needed to reclaim herself, to rediscover the woman she had once been before she lost herself in this toxic cycle of love and sacrifice. As she sat on the couch, her phone still in hand, Emily made a decision. She would no longer beg for love that wasn't being returned. She would no longer sacrifice herself for a man who didn't appreciate her. She would let go. She would break free. And so, Emily took the first step toward freedom. She erased Mike's contact information from her phone and with trembling hands deleted the messages, the memories, the ties that had held her captive for so long. This time, there would be no going back. She was done. This was the moment of change. The moment when Emily decided to take control of her life. No more second guessing, no more doubts. She was done chasing someone who didn't love her back. It was time to love herself first. As she closed her eyes and took a deep breath, Emily knew that this was the start of something new, a new chapter in her life where she would finally put herself first. It was one of those days where Emily felt like she had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. The argument with Mike had been the latest in a long string of emotional battles that left her exhausted, both mentally and physically. Her heart was heavy with the frustration of giving so much of herself to a relationship that always seemed to demand more and more, yet offered little in return. The tears she had been holding back threatened to spill, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she grabbed her jacket and left the apartment, needing some space to breathe. It was a chilly evening when Emily found herself standing outside the little dessert shop, the warm light spilling out into the dark street. She had passed by it countless times, but never once thought of stopping. Tonight, however, she felt drawn to it. The neon sign flickered in the darkness, and the comforting scent of freshly baked pastries seemed to call to her, offering a fleeting moment of solace from the turmoil in her heart. She had no expectations, just a quiet desire to indulge in something small to take her mind off the mess of her life. As she entered the shop, the atmosphere was completely different from the emotional chaos she had just left behind. Soft music played in the background, and the warmth of the shop enveloped her as she scanned the menu. The friendly barista smiled at her, and for the first time in a while, Emily allowed herself to smile back. She ordered a slice of chocolate cake, a cappuccino, and sat by the window, watching the world go by. The soft chatter of other customers and the clink of silverware were oddly soothing, a small piece of peace in a day that had otherwise felt like a whirlwind. The first bite of the cake was heavenly, a rich, bittersweet contrast to the numbness she had been feeling lately. It was comforting, but more than that, it was a revelation. Something so simple, something she had never taken the time for before, was bringing her a sense of joy. As she savored each bite, Emily realized that in all the years she had spent trying to make Mike happy, she had forgotten what it meant to do something for herself. She had neglected the simple pleasures in life because she had been so focused on fixing a relationship that was beyond repair. As the minutes passed, Emily's thoughts began to shift. She started questioning everything, her relationship with Mike, her role in it, and how much longer she was willing to sacrifice her happiness for someone who barely acknowledged her needs. How many more years should she suffer in silence? How many more arguments would she endure before realizing that the price she was paying was too high? For the first time in a long while, Emily allowed herself to think about her own future, about what she truly wanted, and about what it would take for her to finally feel free. By the time she finished her dessert and sipped the last of her cappuccino, Emily felt a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't about the cake, it was about the realization that she had the power to choose her own happiness. She didn't have to live in the shadow of Mike's emotional neglect. She didn't have to keep fighting for something that was never going to work. This small moment of indulgence had given her the clarity she so desperately needed. Emily wasn't just someone who was capable of loving deeply. She was someone who deserved love in return, someone worthy of respect. The decision to move on. Emily's walk back home was a quiet one. The crisp night air felt refreshing against her skin, and with each step she took, she felt lighter, as though the weight of the world was slowly lifting off her shoulders. By the time she reached her apartment, she was no longer consumed by the emotional turmoil that had been her constant companion for so long. As she walked through the door, she was met with the familiar sight of her shared life with Mike. The cluttered kitchen, the shoes scattered carelessly across the hallway, the half-empty bottles of wine that had sat on the counter untouched for weeks. The apartment was a reflection of their relationship, unkept, chaotic, and stale. It was a space that once held memories of love and laughter, but had now become a prison of unspoken words and unresolved tension. Emily felt a pang in her chest, but this time it wasn't sadness. It was anger, a fiery, cleansing anger that had been building up inside her for years. She had been living in this emotional wasteland, clinging to a love that was never truly hers, never reciprocated in the way she deserved. As she looked around the apartment, she realized that it wasn't just the physical mess that needed to be cleaned up. It was her heart, her mind, and her life. The years she had spent trying to make Mike happy, trying to fix something that was broken from the start, had drained her. And now she was done. She was done sacrificing her happiness for a relationship that never gave her the love and respect she needed. It was time to take control of her life. The first thing she did was grab her phone. For a moment, she hesitated, her fingers hovering over Mike's contact. But then, with a deep breath, she made her decision. She blocked his number. She had done it before, but this time it felt different. It wasn't out of anger, it was out of self-preservation. She had tried to make this relationship work for so long, and now she needed to let go. She couldn't keep waiting for someone who was never going to love her the way she needed. She had given him enough chances. As she sat down on the couch, Emily allowed herself to feel the full weight of her decision. For the first time in years, she felt free. She wasn't bound by the cycles of their toxic relationship. She wasn't waiting for a phone call, an apology, or a promise that things would change. She was done. The phone buzzed in her hand, but she ignored it. It wasn't Mike. It was a message from her boss, a work-related call about an upcoming project that required her attention. Emily looked at the message and a small smile tugged at her lips. For the first time in a long time, something outside of her relationship was demanding her attention. It wasn't about Mike. It wasn't about their breakup. It was about her career, her life, and her future. The project was important, and it required her to travel for an extended period of time. Emily felt a surge of excitement. This was it. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. She had always wanted to focus on her career, but she had never allowed herself to do so. She had always put Mike's needs ahead of her own, but now, the universe was offering her a chance to take charge of her life. Without hesitation, Emily made her decision. She would go. She would take the job, take the time she needed, and for the first time, put herself first. It was the beginning of something new, a new chapter where she wasn't just living for someone else, but for herself. As she responded to the work email, a sense of calm washed over her. She had made the right choice. She was finally moving on. The catalyst for change. A few days later, Emily packed her bags, ready for her business trip to Los Angeles. The prospect of a year and a half away from her old life, away from the toxic relationship she had just escaped, felt like a breath of fresh air. The decision to leave was freeing. She didn't feel guilty. She didn't feel like she was abandoning anything or anyone. She was starting fresh, and that was all that mattered. As the plane took off, Emily looked out the window, the city fading below her. She had no idea what awaited her in Los Angeles, but she knew one thing for sure. Her future was in her hands now. It was her time to shine, to grow, and to rediscover who she was outside of the relationship that had consumed so much of her life. For the first time in years, Emily felt truly alive. She was no longer a passenger in her own life, waiting for things to happen. She was the one making decisions, taking risks, and carving her own path. And this was just the beginning. It was an ordinary day when Emily first received the email that would change her life. She was sitting in her tiny apartment, surrounded by the familiar chaos of cluttered papers and half-drunk cups of coffee, when her boss's message popped up on the screen. The subject line read, "Exciting opportunity, business trip to Los Angeles." At first, Emily thought it was just another one of those fleeting projects that would require a few extra hours of work. But as she read further, her eyes widened in surprise. The company needed someone to handle a long-term assignment in Los Angeles, and they wanted Emily. The role involved managing a high-profile project for a key client, and it was the kind of opportunity she had been quietly waiting for. It would require her to move across the country for at least a year and a half. There was no hesitation in her response. Emily felt a surge of excitement, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom, independence, and the opportunity to focus entirely on herself. For the first time in years, she was choosing a career decision that didn't involve Mike or his demands. She wasn't going to worry about his feelings or about how this would impact their already strained relationship. She had made a decision for herself. As she hit send on her acceptance reply, a weight lifted off her shoulders. It was as though a door had opened and she was stepping through it, into a life she had long ignored but desperately needed. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparations, packing, finalizing projects, and tying up loose ends at work. She informed Mike about the trip, but there was no drama this time. There was no pleading, no apologizing, no rehashing the same tired arguments. It was simply a statement, "I'm going to Los Angeles. I'll be away for a year and a half." His response was what she had come to expect. Cold indifference, a hint of frustration. He didn't care enough to try to stop her. And Emily realized, with clarity that shocked her, that this was the very reason she had stayed with him for so long. Because he never truly cared. She blocked his number before she left, knowing full well that the distance would allow her the space to reflect on everything. The toxic dynamic they shared had drained her for too long. Now she was finally free from the constant emotional turmoil. Self-discovery and growth. Los Angeles welcomed Emily with open arms. The city was alive, vibrant, and full of possibilities. The moment she landed at LAX, she felt a rush of excitement. This was her new beginning. The busy streets, the bustling city vibe, and the warm California sun all felt like a breath of fresh air. For the first time, she wasn't weighed down by the expectations of Mike, her family, or anyone else. It was just her. The first few weeks in Los Angeles were a whirlwind of meetings, deadlines, and learning the ropes of the new project. Emily threw herself into the work, determined to prove herself. She worked late into the night, pushed herself to learn new skills, and felt a sense of fulfillment that had long eluded her. The work was challenging, but it was rewarding. And for the first time in years, Emily felt valued, at her job, by her colleagues, and most importantly, by herself. It wasn't just about the job. Emily had time to explore the city, make new friends, and discover who she was outside of the person she had been in her relationship with Mike. She found herself taking weekend trips to the beach, hiking in the mountains, and even attending local art galleries. She started doing things that made her happy without feeling guilty or selfish. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt like she was living for herself, not for Mike, not for anyone else, but for the person she had long neglected. She also met people who truly appreciated her, colleagues who respected her work, strangers who smiled at her as she walked down the street, and friends who made her feel seen and valued. It was a stark contrast to the loneliness she had often felt in her relationship with Mike, where she had been made to feel invisible, constantly vying for his attention and affection. Now, in Los Angeles, Emily felt a sense of community that had been missing for so long. The self-doubt that had plagued her for years began to fade. She realized that happiness wasn't something that came from external validation or from having someone else tell her she was worthy. It was something that came from within. And for the first time in years, Emily embraced that truth. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. There were moments when the weight of the past would hit her, when she would think of Mike and the relationship she had left behind. Mike's calls came less frequently, and when they did, it was always the same, an attempt to reel her back in. But she no longer craved those empty apologies, those hollow promises. Instead, she focused on the future, her career, her independence, and her newfound sense of self. Her time in Los Angeles became a time of profound growth. She started setting boundaries in both her personal and professional life. She learned to say no when something didn't serve her, and she learned to say yes to opportunities that pushed her out of her comfort zone. Every day, she became more and more comfortable with the idea that she didn't need anyone to complete her. She was already whole. Her colleagues began to notice the change in her as well. Emily was more confident, more assertive, and more capable than ever before. Her boss, who had once only seen her potential in passing, started to recognize her as a key player in the company. She was offered more opportunities, more responsibilities, and her career flourished in ways she had never imagined. She became a woman who no longer waited for permission to succeed. She no longer needed validation from others. Emily realized that the person she had been waiting for all along was herself. She was the hero of her own story. And as she stepped into the next chapter of her life, she knew one thing for certain. She would never again settle for anything less than a life filled with respect, love, and authenticity. By the time Emily's year-long business assignment in Los Angeles was drawing to a close, she had completely transformed. The woman who had once begged for love, who had given up pieces of herself for a relationship that wasn't healthy, had now become a woman who owned her future. She had discovered her worth, her purpose, and her power. And in doing so, she had unlocked a version of herself that she had once thought was out of reach. The freedom that came with being her authentic self was more rewarding than any career success or romantic relationship she had ever imagined. For the first time in her life, Emily was living on her own terms. And that, she realized, was the greatest gift of all. It had been weeks since Emily had left Mike behind in Los Angeles, focusing on her newfound life of independence and growth. For the first time in years, she was living without the constant weight of his emotional turmoil. The silence between them was a relief, something she hadn't realized she needed until she experienced it. But then, one evening, her phone rang. The caller ID displayed Mike's name. Emily stared at the screen for a moment, her heart a little heavier than she wanted it to be. She had done her best to block out the past, to let go of the emotional ties that had kept her tethered to him for so long. Yet there was something about that name, Mike, that brought a flood of memories she thought she had buried. Without thinking, she picked up the call. "Hello?" she answered, her voice steady but guarded. "Emily?" Mike's voice came through the phone, softer than she remembered, almost timid. "I've been thinking about you. About us." She could hear the hesitation in his voice, and something deep inside her clicked. She had heard this tone before, the familiar ring of someone trying to manipulate a situation to their benefit, someone who had gotten too comfortable with her being the one to fix things. "Look, I'm sorry," Mike continued, his words coming in slow, almost reluctant. "I know things have been messed up between us, and I've been selfish. I should have treated you better, and I regret all of it. I really do." Emily sat down, her gaze fixed on the skyline outside her window. The city lights twinkled like stars, reflecting the calm she had found in her own soul over the past weeks. It was as if the world was reminding her that she was no longer the same woman who had begged for love, who had tolerated disrespect, and who had sacrificed her own well-being just to keep a relationship alive. Mike was trying to pull her back into that old, toxic dynamic, but Emily wasn't that woman anymore. She had spent so many years forgiving him, letting him make promises he never kept, hoping things would change, but they never did. His apology, though familiar and comforting, wasn't enough to sway her this time. Mike paused, sensing her silence. "Emily, please, I'm sorry. I've been such an idiot. Can't we just go back to how we were?" That was it. That moment right there. Can't we just go back to how we were? It was the question that sealed it for Emily. He hadn't learned a thing. He didn't care enough to understand why she had left in the first place. He was still the same man who thought he could manipulate her into coming back, who expected her to forget all the emotional wounds he had inflicted on her. Emily felt a sharp pang in her chest, but it wasn't the same kind of ache she had felt in the past. This was the ache of realization, the final bitter truth. She had loved him with everything she had, but he had never truly loved her back. He loved the idea of her, the woman who was always there, always ready to forgive, always willing to put his needs above her own, but he never loved her. "You still don't get it, Mike," she said, her voice clear and strong. "You can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to normal. You've had plenty of chances, and each time you've let me down." She stood up, pacing around her apartment. She didn't need to hear more. She had given him enough of her time, enough of her energy. For so many years, she had believed that love was supposed to be a two-way street, that love was about compromise, mutual respect, and emotional support. But Mike had shown her time and time again that he didn't understand those principles. He had been emotionally unavailable, selfish, and manipulative. "I've spent too many years sacrificing my happiness for you, Mike," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "And I'm done. I'm done pretending that this relationship was healthy or worth saving." Mike's voice faltered, and there was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. She could almost feel him scrambling for something to say, some justification, but she was already past that point. She had heard all the excuses, all the reasons why he couldn't be the partner she needed him to be, and none of them mattered anymore. "Emily," he said, his voice now desperate, "please don't do this. I'm sorry. You mean everything to me." But Emily was already over it. She was done giving her energy to someone who couldn't even appreciate it. "No," she replied, her voice cold and firm. "I used to mean everything to you, but that was before. You've shown me who you really are, and now I'm showing you who I really am. I'm strong. I don't need you to be happy, and I don't need your apology." With that, she ended the call. There was no final confrontation, no dramatic argument. It was simply a moment of clarity. She had already let go, and now she was ready to move on. The moment she hung up the phone, Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. The weight that had been holding her down for so many years was suddenly gone. It was as if she had freed herself from a mental and emotional prison she hadn't even realized she was in. For the first time, she felt in control of her life. She didn't need Mike, she never had. What she had been craving all along wasn't his apology or his love. It was her own self-respect and the freedom to live her life on her own terms. The woman who had once begged for affection, who had sacrificed her own needs to make him happy, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had rediscovered her worth. Mike had been a part of her past, but he was no longer a part of her future. The pain of the breakup still lingered, but Emily knew she was stronger than ever. She had walked away from a relationship that had drained her, and she was determined not to fall back into old patterns. In the weeks that followed, Emily continued to embrace her newfound freedom. She poured herself into her career, focusing on her goals and making decisions that benefited her future. She took time for herself, something she had neglected for far too long. and learned to enjoy her own company. She found hobbies that brought her joy, reconnected with old friends, and even began dating again. But this time she was choosing for herself, not out of desperation or fear of being alone. She no longer felt like a shadow of herself. She was fully present in her life, and for the first time in a long time, she felt proud of who she was. Emily knew she had made the right decision by walking away from Mike. It was the final act of empowerment, breaking free from the man who had never truly valued her and reclaiming the love she had always deserved. She had found herself again, and this time she was never going back. Emily's decision to walk away from Mike was not a simple one, but as the weeks passed, she realized it was the first step toward her own personal freedom. For the first time in years, she was no longer tethered to a relationship defined by emotional manipulation and unreciprocated effort. The burden of constantly chasing after Mike's affection had lifted, and with it came the sweet relief of a fresh start. Her life began to flourish in ways she had never expected. Emily threw herself into her work with renewed energy, discovering a deep sense of fulfillment in her career that she hadn't realized was missing. She had always been dedicated to her job, but now she found herself genuinely thriving, no longer distracted by the emotional roller coaster of her personal life. She was respected by her colleagues, and more importantly, she respected herself. But it wasn't just her professional life that improved. Emily started exploring new hobbies, something she had put off for years in favor of Mike's whims. She joined a painting class, something she had always wanted to try but had never found the time for. The first few brush strokes were awkward, but over time, she started to create pieces that filled her with pride. There was something deeply therapeutic about pouring her feelings into her art, creating something tangible from the emotions she had buried for so long. She also began to spend more time with her friends who had stood by her side through the ups and downs of her relationship with Mike. They reminded her of who she was before Mike came into her life, and their encouragement helped her rebuild the parts of herself that had been dulled over the years. She laughed again, truly laughed, without the weight of anxiety pressing down on her chest. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt completely at ease in her own skin. She no longer questioned her worth or wondered if she was good enough. She was enough, just as she was. She didn't need to bend over backward to gain someone's love. The realization came quietly, like the soft morning light after a long, dark night. She didn't need validation from anyone to feel complete. It was during one of her weekend hikes, a solo trip she had planned to reconnect with nature, that she met someone new. Jason. He wasn't anything like Mike. He didn't come with baggage or the emotional drama that Emily had grown so accustomed to. Jason was calm, grounded, and most importantly, he saw her, truly saw her for who she was, without expectations or conditions. They met in a small cafe at the end of the hiking trail, both of them taking a break after the long climb. Jason was sitting alone, his backpack resting by his side, a book in his hand. Emily had just finished her hike and was about to grab some coffee when their eyes met. A simple, polite smile passed between them, but there was something in his gaze that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. She felt the kind of warmth that came from being appreciated without having to do anything to earn it. They started talking, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. Jason wasn't trying to impress her or get something from her. He was genuinely interested in getting to know her. As they shared stories of their lives, Emily found herself laughing without reservation, feeling comfortable and at ease. Jason listened carefully to her, asking thoughtful questions and respecting the space she needed to open up. Over the next few weeks, they spent more time together. Jason wasn't pushy or demanding. He allowed Emily to be herself, without judgment. They went to art galleries, attended live music shows, and even took spontaneous road trips to nearby towns. With Jason, there was no pressure, no hidden agendas, just two people enjoying each other's company. For the first time in years, Emily felt what it was like to be in a relationship where the love was mutual. It wasn't about sacrifice or giving up her identity. It was about respect, balance, and sharing life's ups and downs as equals. Jason never asked her to change or be someone she wasn't. In fact, he encouraged her to continue growing and pursuing her passions just as he did with his own. Emily began to understand that love wasn't about constantly giving, never receiving. It wasn't about bending over backward to please someone else. Love, when it was right, should feel like home, not a battlefield. She realized that Mike's inability to offer her true emotional support, his constant coldness, and his emotional unavailability were not her fault. She had given him everything, but it wasn't enough because he wasn't capable of truly giving back in return. With Jason, Emily was free to be herself. He didn't need her to be anything other than who she was, strong, independent, and full of life. And that was the most beautiful gift of all. As their relationship deepened, Emily understood that this was the kind of love she deserved all along. A love based on mutual support, trust, and equality. It wasn't about grand gestures or promises. It was about the small moments, sharing quiet mornings over coffee, laughing together during an afternoon hike, or simply sitting in comfortable silence as they read books side by side. These were the moments that made her realize that she had been looking for love in all the wrong places. Emily's life was no longer defined by her past relationship. She was no longer the woman who constantly begged for someone's attention or tried to fix a broken relationship. She was no longer willing to sacrifice her happiness for someone who couldn't meet her halfway. She had found her own strength, and with that strength, she had created a life that was her own, one filled with love, respect, and independence. She knew now that the most important relationship she would ever have was with herself. And that self-love was the foundation of everything else. Without it, nothing else mattered. With it, she was free to explore the world, build her career, and develop deep, meaningful relationships with people who valued her for who she truly was. As Emily looked out over the city skyline one evening, sitting on the balcony of her new apartment with Jason by her side, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. She had finally let go of the past. She had found herself again, and in doing so, had found the kind of love that truly mattered, the love that starts with self-respect and radiates outward, touching everything and everyone in its path. The journey had been long and painful, but it had been worth it. Emily had discovered the greatest truth of all. Love begins with yourself, and once you learn to love yourself, the world opens up in ways you never imagined. And as she looked toward the future, she knew that this was just the beginning. As Emily looks back on her journey, she realizes how much she has grown and learned. For so many years, she poured her heart and soul into a relationship with Mike, believing that love meant constant sacrifice. She believed that giving up her happiness and self-respect was the price to pay for love. But the truth was, Emily was always enough, just as she was. Her worth wasn't determined by someone else's ability to love her in return. Through the pain and heartache, she learned the most valuable lesson of all. Love should never come at the expense of self-respect or personal happiness. Emily finally understood that the love she sought from Mike was never worth the cost of her own identity. The person she had sacrificed so much for had never truly been capable of offering her the love and respect she deserved. The realization came slowly, but once she accepted it, she embraced the freedom of being her true self. The key takeaway from Emily's journey is clear. Don't ever lose yourself in the pursuit of love. Know your worth and always put your happiness first. When we lose ourselves in relationships that drain us, we not only give away our power, but we also forget that self-love is the foundation for all healthy relationships. Emily's story is a reminder that true love starts within, and it's only when we value ourselves that we can truly build a life filled with love, respect, and fulfillment. What do you think? Do you believe love should come with sacrifices, or should we always put ourselves first? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If Emily's story resonated with you, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more empowering stories about self-love, redemption, and personal growth. Your journey to embracing your worth starts now. Let's grow together.